Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong, where I look at the Facebook memes of a right winger that I used to know in my high school days and I debunk his bullcrap. So today I'm going to actually look at two memes. One is actually a normal one. I said I would give him credit if he ever posts a normal meme that I see on his Facebook wall. And this one just says being a parent means hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and hoping it's just a ghost and not your toddler getting up again. So that's a cute, relatively normal post. So congratulations. I'll give you a little golf clap, Mr. K. And right below that, though, there's some more crap, though, some more right wing BS. And this one is from the right wing Facebook page called Conservatives Today. And it's a simple text one. It says, "Never forget Democrat mayors sent SWAT teams to shut down churches and barbershops, but let looters and Antifa burn down cities." Now, who isn't tired of that narrative already? I mean, that was just a constant thing they were claiming in 2020, right? So, here's a little bit of a reality check. The public health orders applied broadly, not targeted at churches or barbershops exclusively. During the early months of COVID 19, both Republicans and Democratic mayors and governors issued shutdowns for public safety. Churches, gyms, salons, and other close contact venues were temporarily closed across the political spectrum, not because of ideology, but because of the virus's risk of spreading indoors. So, very easy to debunk this claim right off the bat. In fact, Republican led states like Texas and even Florida also issued closures of similar businesses. This was about health guidelines, not political or religious persecution. So, very important as a consideration. A few high profile enforcement incidents, such as in California or my state of Michigan, involved law enforcement but not SWAT teams in the military sense, but they were responding to defined violations of local ordinances. These were rare and often dramatized. And ironically, one of the things that right wingers do critique Governor Whitmer over is that they claim that she intentionally let some people get sick in hospitals because they didn't separate the patients enough. So it's a little bit of a strange contradiction there that a lot of these right wingers actually convey. Because on the one hand, they wanted to leave everybody alone, yet they also want to uniquely blame Governor Whitmer for outbreaks in hospitals. And interestingly enough, in those cases, from what I recall, those hospitals were in violation of the orders that were passed. So, at the risk of sounding like I'm defending Gretchen Whitmer, it actually wasn't her fault. The hospitals in question were not adhering strictly enough to the standards that were passed at the state level. So, yeah, even that critique falls short. So the letting looters burn cities line is also quite misleading. No mayors, Democrat or otherwise, and notice they always say Democrat, not Democratic. It's a fun little game they play. They find it cute to say the name Democrat instead of Democratic because I guess they want to emphasize the word rat in there. But anyway, none of those mayors simply let cities burn. During the 2020 protests following George Floyd's murder, violence and looting did occur, but most protests were actually peaceful. And I know some people that on the right, they hear that and they roll their eyes and they instantly discredit it, or they try to discredit it. But nonetheless, it is a fact that most of the protests were peaceful, and they weren't nearly as violent or even property destructive as some of these people would have you think. And many local officials, including Democratic mayors, condemned the violence and deployed police and National Guard units to stop it. And in some cases, they were criticized for that. So, in a way, these Democratic officials were caught, I guess, between a rock and a hard place, if I'm using the analogy correctly or the saying correctly. It was a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation from their perspective. And of course, as I always note when I talk about the rioting in 2020, the fact of the matter is that riots are actually not quite so rare, and it's not always political. You can have sports riots where property is destroyed. You know, an overzealous fan might set fire to something, and that's a proven phenomenon. It happens regularly, and people don't tend to act as if the world is absolutely going to be destroyed based on a little bit of property destruction. So, it's one of those things that makes for a convenient narrative, but in the grand picture, the grand scheme of things, a few, I guess, incidents does not mean life is going to be over. So, one example is that the Minneapolis mayor Jacob Fry, or Frey, I don't remember how that's pronounced, but anyway, he requested National Guard assistance during the unrest, and he received it. So, even when these Democratic leaders do the right thing, at least from the right wing perspective, it doesn't matter. The right wingers will still claim that they did nothing and just, let people go crazy, or whatever their narrative is. You know what I mean? So in Portland, while protests were large and long running, local and federal law enforcement clashed with demonstrators repeatedly, including tear gas, arrests, and curfews. So there was no hands off policy. That is a myth. And it's also a myth that no people who did destroy property or stole things were arrested. There were actually mass arrests. And at the time, I remember seeing a lot of this footage, and indeed, the police were often there instigating any sort of violence. I remember one piece of footage of a cop on a bicycle actually running over somebody's head. So, that they do not criticize that type of violence when the police were instigating things or ramming into crowds with their vehicles, with their police cruisers, which I saw. And actually, one of the eeriest pieces of footage from back then that I recall seeing was officers going around and sort of quietly and calmly slashing people's tires. I don't know if anybody out there remembers that, but oddly enough, one of the most disturbing pieces of footage that I can remember from 2020 and these protests was actually a non-violent one. It was a really creepy piece of footage. I I wonder if any of you out there remember that one, but it was, I don't know, it was like something out of a John Carpenter movie or something like that. But anyway, another point here that needs to be addressed is that Antifa is not an organization with a chain of command. Antifa is a loose label, not a structured group. So blaming Antifa as if it's a unified force ignores the complexities of the protest movements and lets bad actors on all sides off the hook. And Antifa became a boogeyman for the right wingers to pick on and they would claim that FBI agents were all Antifa or something like that. Just very convoluted, nonsensical, and amorphous stuff. You could claim that anybody doing anything bad might be Antifa, just like you could claim that everybody's a communist or whatever. It's a very loose fitting term, and it's something that they applied at January 6th. Remember, even though we know fully well that Antifa or the FBI was not the main cause of January 6th, a lot of these people were, these right wingers were claiming that, the whole thing was Antifa organized or something like that. But of course it wasn't. But you don't need evidence to make claims. I mean, that's one of the reasons that these claims are made in the first place, because the whole point is to add a greater element of confusion to situations that could already be confusing. So there was a lot of false equivalence and cherry picking in the meme in question, equating temporary public health measures with riots, conflates very different issues. One was an emergency response to a deadly pandemic. The other was a response to national outrage over systemic racism and police violence. And keep in mind that the right wing, uh, some people are advocating for the release of Derek Chauvin, the guy who killed George Floyd, because they want to instigate further violence, because they love violence. They want to see, not only more property destruction and rioting, because that's secretly what they want to have happen. They love to provoke people into those types of activities, but they definitely also want to see, right wing people who murder others to be pardoned. And in this case, it would be truly inflammatory because Derek Chauvin was absolutely guilty. We know that for a fact. In addition to the jury verdict that successfully did convict Derek Chauvin, we can see clearly on the footage that he knelt on the neck of George Floyd, and the result was that George Floyd died. Pretty open and shut case. And at the very least, I would think it would have been an involuntary manslaughter charge, but thankfully it was actually a much harsher charge than that. And the right wingers out there don't like that. They want people, especially police, but presumably anybody, to be able to kneel on the neck of anybody that they don't like and kill them, so long as that person they don't like is a minority, especially if it's, somebody that um, might receive media attention in a sympathetic light. They want to get rid of any positive media attention to victims of police brutality, because you're not supposed to criticize police, just like you're not supposed to criticize the military, unless you're Donald Trump, in which case you can criticize, all of these different types of people that we're supposed to revere. But anyway, the bottom line here is that this meme is political propaganda. It twists reality by ignoring context. It is exaggerating isolated events and stoking division. So, if you want to debate public policy or police abuse, do it with facts, not with cheap distortion tactics.